Hi, Mystery Recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a comedy fantasy movie called The Mask. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens in a fictional place named Edge City. It is a sprawling town whose skies are covered by toxic fumes, and all the wastes are dumped right into a river. Nearby, a group of council workers are fixing an underwater sewage pipe. One of them suddenly notices a strange box buried underneath a pile of rocks. Just as he breaks it open, the new sewage pipe being lowered into the river slips out of the chains. It hits the worker, while a wooden mask that was inside the box floats up to the surface. Elsewhere in the same town, we are introduced to Stanley Ipkiss, a teller at the Edge City Savings Bank. He is a shy, good-natured man who helps everyone with open arms. He is also extremely naive, and people around him, especially the women, fully exploit his innocence for their own benefit. The only person who tries to stop him from falling into the trap of cunning women is his colleague, Charlie Schumacher. One afternoon, Charlie invites Stanley to the hottest place in the town, the Coco Bongo nightclub. The latter is not sure if he will be allowed to enter such a happening place, but Charlie reassures him that he has friends working in the club who will help them get in. Shortly afterwards, an extremely attractive blonde woman who is wearing a skimpy red dress and carrying a black bag enters the bank. Her name is Tina Carlisle, and she performs as a singer at the Coco Bongo. Charlie immediately rushes to her, asking how he may be of service. However, she gives him a cold shoulder and heads towards Stanley's desk. Tina puts her bag on the desk and tells him that she wants to open an account. Stanley, who has never been this close to an attractive woman before, is completely knocked off his socks. His nervousness only increases when she starts to casually flirt with him. Unbeknownst to the naive teller, this beautiful lady has a camera hidden in her bag. It is recording every little detail of the bank's vault, which contains millions of dollars. She was sent to the bank by her boyfriend, the gangster Dorian Tyrel, to prepare for a heist. Dorian is the supervisor of the Coco Bongo nightclub, which is actually owned by the notorious drug lord Nico. Using the captured footage, Dorian and his henchmen plan to grab all the money in the vault. They will then use that money to overthrow the main boss Nico and establish control over the illegal businesses in Edge City. After work, Stanley goes to pick up his car from a local repair shop. He had left his car for a simple oil change, but the mechanics tell him that it needs a complete engine overhaul. They even make the naive bank teller sign on some documents so that they can hustle more money from him. Since the mechanics haven't finished working on the car yet, they lend him a junk car as a replacement for the time being. Following this, Stanley is forced to drive the rusty old car to the Coco Bongo. His night gets off to a bad start as all the ladies are immediately repelled by the junk on four wheels. Stanley keeps his head up and joins his friend Charlie, who is surrounded by a bunch of women. Charlie also seems to know the club's bouncer, and he, along with the women, soon enter the club. Unfortunately, Charlie is so engrossed with the women that he doesn't realize that Stanley is left behind. The latter tries to follow his friend into the club, only for the bouncer to throw him out unceremoniously. Shortly after, as Stanley is dusting off his clothing, Tina arrives at the spot. He tries to play it cool in front of the hot lady by pretending that everything's going just fine, but at this moment, the club's valet arrives and hands him the key to his rusty old car in front of Tina. This completes his humiliation, and Stanley decides to return home with his tail between his legs. Unfortunately for the poor guy, this horrible night has just begun. He is headed back home when the inevitable happens. The rusty old car breaks down on a bridge over the city river. Exasperated, he goes to the bridge's edge and looks at the river in frustration. He suddenly sees a person who is most probably unconscious, on the verge of drowning in the murky water. Stanley immediately makes his way down from the bridge and jumps into the river. He soon reaches the person, only to discover that it was simply a heap of garbage that looked like a human, kinda like Stanley. That was too harsh. However, he discovers a strange old wooden mask on top of the junk pile. Stanley decides to keep it, and then heads back home on foot. Once he is safely in his room, he keeps getting pulled by the mask, as if by some unseen magical power. He eventually puts it on, and something really strange happens. Stanley transforms into a cartoonish figure with a green head, unaffected by the laws of physics. Just like Jim Carrey himself, the mask transforms him to this superhuman form, where his inner repressed personality is turned up to the max. In this form, he can freely indulge in his desires and fantasies without a care for the consequences. Then, masked Stanley decides to enjoy the night by partying and heads downstairs. He tiptoes along the corridor so as not to wake up his landlady, an irritable old woman named Mrs. Penman. However, an alarm clock falls down from his pocket and begins bouncing all over the corridor. Masked Stanley then takes out a huge wooden hammer from his pocket and tries to silence the alarm by smashing it. He manages to do it, but not before he punches several holes in the floor of the corridor. Seconds later, Mrs. Penman angrily comes out of her room and sees this crazy-looking green-headed figure. She mistakes him for a burglar and tries to shoot him with a shotgun. Masked Stanley, however, jumps out the window and lands in the middle of the street below. He then heads to the garage where he had been scammed earlier that day. There, he confronts the mechanics by coloring them in glittery paint and shoving a huge metal rod up their ass. The scene then changes to the next morning as Stanley wakes up peacefully in his bed. He initially believes that he had only dreamt the events of the previous night. However, shortly after, Officer Kellaway from the local police department knocks on the door and questions him about the incident in the house. This finally makes Stanley realize that he had turned into the crazy green-headed persona, but he claims to know nothing in front of the police. He then throws the mask out of the window, but it returns to his apartment like a boomerang. Later, the mechanics are found badly beaten, which sparks the interest of reporter Peggy Brandt. She wants to investigate this matter further, so she heads to the Edge City Savings Bank. There, she tries to interview Stanley, as he was a customer at the repair shop. Rather curiously, Peggy also flirts with him during this process. Meanwhile, drug lord Nico discovers the plans to overthrow him and summons the prime suspect, Dorian. He forces him to lie flat on the ground and places a golf tee in his mouth. The drug lord then puts a ball on the tee and whacks it with his club. Nico's message is clear: he is good at golf, and he is fed up with Dorian's shenanigans and did all of this to put him in his place. The drug lord then gives the wannabe gangster a week to leave the city, threatening to kill him if he doesn't comply. That night, Stanley sleeps restlessly and even dreams of making out with Tina. This moment of pleasure is interrupted when his dog Milo unexpectedly wakes him up. Stanley is now incredibly frustrated and wants to meet Tina by hook or crook. So he puts on the mask and once again transforms into the ultra-confident, wacky, and superhuman masked persona. Masked Stanley knows he needs money to enter the Coco Bongo, so he decides to rob the Edge City Savings Bank. Meanwhile, Dorian's accomplices are also present in front of the bank for the same purpose, but they are of no match for Masked Stanley, who breaks in and loots the bank in a matter of seconds. Things go from bad to worse for Dorian's men when the cops arrive, forcing them to run away without a single penny. On the other hand, Stanley gains entry to Coco Bongo by showering the bouncer with the stolen money. He goes inside to watch Tina's performance and can't hide his excitement. He soon begins to masterfully dance with her, and Tina falls in love with this uber-confident and talented masked man. She has a thing for green men who seem as though they can toss their own salad. In the club's back office, Dorian comes to know that this wacky stranger had eluded the bank before his men. He also sees the masked man kiss Tina in front of everyone, further insulting him. Incensed, Dorian and his men confront the weirdo right on the dance floor. They attempt to shoot him, but the bullets seem to have no effect on him. Right then, police officer Kellaway enters the club, giving Masked Stanley enough time to flee. Dorian, on the other hand, is suspected as the mastermind of the bank robbery. The case seems to be done and dusted when Kellaway suddenly finds a torn piece of pajamas. He immediately recognizes the wacky design on the cloth, as he had seen Stanley wearing the same pajamas last night. The next morning, Stanley wakes up in his room and sees a huge pile of money lying around. This is the same money that he had robbed from the bank last night. Just then, he hears Officer Kellaway aggressively knocking on his door. A frightened Stanley quickly shoves all the money into a closet and then opens the door. Officer Kellaway confronts him with the scrap of his PJs and asks what he knows about the mysterious person with the mask. Stanley lies that the pajamas were stolen, but Kellaway obviously doesn't believe this story and decides to spy on Stanley without the latter's knowledge. In the meantime, Dorian convenes a meeting with his henchmen. He promises a bounty of $50,000 to whoever locates the masked man. On the other hand, Stanley visits the historian Dr. Newman, whom he had seen on television 2 days earlier. Newman suspects the mask was made in honor of the nocturnal Norse god of mischief, Loki. However, he also thinks the mask is simply a representation and doesn't actually have any magical powers. Stanley then tells him about his experiences of wearing the mask, but Newman dismisses him, thinking it's a joke. He's seen the Avengers, and he knows that green guy beat the hell out of Loki. The poor bank teller attempts to demonstrate it by wearing the mask, but nothing happens. It is obvious that the mask only manifests its powers during the nighttime. At the Edge City police station, Kellaway receives a breakthrough in the bank robbery case. The fingerprints on the money left behind during the bank robbery match those of Stanley. Hence, Kellaway and his deputy begin tracking the suspect's movement. Elsewhere, Tina goes to the bank to close her account for good. She meets with Stanley, and the two have a short but personal conversation. It is obvious that she is infatuated with the masked man and wants to meet him again. So, Stanley makes up yet another lie and says he is friends with the enigmatic figure. He even arranges a meeting between the masked man and Tina. That night, masked Stanley goes to meet Tina at a local park. The rendezvous takes a turn for the worse as Officer Kellaway ambushes the masked man. The latter runs away and quickly takes off his mask to return to his normal human form. But just when everything looks to be over, Peggy Brandt appears on the spot. She manages to whisk Stanley away, while the police unsuccessfully try to shoot the duo. In a shocking twist, Peggy then delivers him to Dorian and collects the $50,000 bounty. Following this, Dorian ties up Stanley and yanks the mask away from him. The thug then dons the magical mask on himself, transforming into a hideous but super strong monster-like figure. Shortly afterwards, Dorian's henchmen break into Stanley's apartment and seize the money from the bank robbery. They then put a green rubber mask in Stanley's pocket and throw him in front of the police station. The poor teller is arrested on suspicion of being the masked man involved in the bank robbery. Unbeknownst to anyone, Stanley's dog Milo has followed his owner to the police station. Early the next morning, Stanley receives a visit from Tina. She tells him that Dorian is planning an attack at a charity ball that will be held in the Coco Bongo later that evening. She also knows that Stanley was behind the green masked figure and confesses her love. In response, Stanley advises her to flee the city. However, Dorian gets wind of Tina's visit to the prison and she is promptly abducted. She tries to escape in vain and is forced to accompany them to the planned attack. A few hours later, the cheeky Milo manages to fetch the prison's keys from a sleeping guard and free his master. Stanley then takes the guard's gun and tries to flee, but bumps into Kellaway right outside the station. With no options left, he takes the officer hostage, and they, along with Milo, drive to the Coco Bongo. Unfortunately, Dorian, who has put on the mask, has already reached the club first. He blows up the gates and challenges Nico to a shootout. The latter is no match for the magical powers of the mask, and Dorian brutally ends up killing him. Next, Dorian ties up Tina, attaches an explosive device to her, and sets the timer for 10 minutes. Stanley, who has bravely sneaked inside with a gun, is also quickly discovered by Dorian's henchmen. Everything seems to be lost for the good guys, when suddenly, Tina gets a brilliant idea. She begs the real human Dorian to kiss her one last time before everything is blown to pieces. The latter obliges and takes off his mask to kiss his ex-lover for the final time. Suddenly, Tina frees her leg and kicks the mask into the air. Milo, who had sneakily followed his master into the club, catches the mask. The magical artifact lands on the dog's head and transforms it into a crazy but scary-looking beast. Meanwhile, Dorian and Stanley engage in a fist fight while the bomb's timer continues to tick. The bank teller manages to temporarily knock out the thug with a furious flurry of punches. Shortly afterwards, Stanley gets the mask from his dog and puts it on one last time. He then uses his superpowers to swallow the bomb just in time. After this, he transforms the club's indoor swimming pool into a drain and flushes down Dorian. In the aftermath of this final fight, Officer Kellaway attempts to arrest Stanley. However, he is stopped by Edge City's mayor, who happened to be in the club to witness the events. The mayor tells the police that he witnessed Dorian wearing the mask and that Stanley saved their lives. In the final scene, Stanley, Tina, Charlie, and Milo stand on a bridge overlooking the river. Stanley hesitates to throw the mask into the water, but Tina takes it from his hand and tosses it over her shoulder. She points out that he doesn't need it anymore, as she is attracted to who he is as a human being. Plus, when he transforms, he looks weird as shit. As the camera pans away, we see Milo swimming away with the mask in his mouth, likely queuing us up for some absolutely abysmal sequels. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.